John Spilsbury. Today we're going to look at John Spilsbury. He was a prominent particular Baptist in the 17th century, and a key figure in that movement as it unfolded. He was the very first to argue that the Old Testament covenantal line of reasoning that was being used to justify why those in the Reformed tradition were baptizing their kids. Spilsbury was the first to argue that that line of reasoning was not sufficient for baptism. He said, or insisted, that baptism and church membership must rest on clear and direct authorization from the New Testament itself. So today we'll look at who John Spilsbury was, a little bit about his context, and that argument that he introduced there in the 17th century. So this is going to be a series on early particular Baptists with the goal of tracing their unfolding history, or the unfolding history of that tradition at its formative stages. The aim's not simply to catalog figures or rehearse the familiar debates, but to understand where and why the particular Baptist tradition begins to diverge from the Reformed tradition, especially with their understanding of covenants. Part of the reason I do this kind of work in these sorts of videos is because it's how I learn. To slow down and doing the historical research carefully and then organizing it clearly enough to teach, give structure and direction to my own way of thinking. So I found that this kind of historical analysis has a broader payoff. When you trace theological disagreements back to their earliest formulations, a lot of confusion can clear up. So my hope is by working through these early figures in sequence, we can build a deeper appreciation for both traditions and then better understand how those differences show up in concrete practices today, like baptism. So we're going to start at the beginning with the earliest architect of that shift, John Spilsbury. Section 1, who John Spilsbury was. John Spilsbury lived and worked in mid-17th century in London during the same turbulent decades that overlapped with the Westminster Assembly and the fragmentation of England's national church. He was not a covenantal Reformed scholastic. He was not formed within the academic structures that shaped the Westminster divines. Spilsbury emerges from within English separatism, though he'd ultimately break from it on the question later on the question of baptism. He likely came out of the semi-separatist congregations in London, specifically the Jacob Lathrop Jersey group that were already committed to gathered church principles and deeply suspicious of any sort of inherited ecclesiastical authority. Scripture had to speak clearly and directly and explicitly. So Spilsbury did hold to what are in our modern day Calvinistic convictions regarding election, grace, and salvation, but he didn't inherit the Reformed covenantal framework within which those doctrines were historically integrated. And it's from this posture, rather than from some sort of mature federal theology, that his argument for believers' baptism emerges. What's up, love?
You pause it?
Yeah. Part 2, the methodological shift, positive institution absolutized. Spilsbury's most important move is not covenantal, but it was methodological. It's often said that Spilsbury simply applies the regulative principle principle to baptism, but that description is or can be misleading if it's heard certainly through Reformed lenses. In the Reformed tradition, the regulative principle does not operate in a vacuum. It functions alongside covenantal administration. So in our Reformed tradition, we don't interpret the sacraments merely by asking, where is the command in the New Testament? We also ask, how has God consistently dealt with his people across redemptive history, especially with households and with children? Spilsbury does something very different there in the 17th century. He treats baptism as a strictly positive institution, a law that exists solely by divine command, like the prohibition of the tree in Eden, or the dietary laws, or the dimensions that were given for the temple. His governing conviction can be summarized this way: what Christ has not commanded for his church may not be opposed upon it, even by theological inference from earlier covenants. So for Spilsbury, the subject of baptism must be determined by explicit New Testament command or example alone. There's no appeals to be made to Abraham. There's no covenantal inheritance. There's no continuity by necessary consequence. You may recognize that language. In this respect, baptism is treated strictly as circumcision was treated, a rite whose subjects require explicit divine authorization, not inference from broader covenantal patterns. Now, the Reformed also recognized baptism as a positive institution, but they understood it as replacing circumcision with an ongoing covenantal administration, not as a freestanding ordinance requiring some sort of independent warrant. And it's that distinction which is decisive. For the Reformed, or the Reformed tradition, the inclusion of believers' children is governed by the unity of the covenant of grace, administered differently across history, but remaining one in substance. Spilsbury rejects that entire line of reasoning. He denies that Old Testament covenant has any authority to tell us who may receive baptism today. Once baptism is severed from covenant administration and it's treated as a standalone New Testament command, the Reformed case for paedobaptism is ruled out methodologically before any sort of detailed exegesis even begins. So this is not the Reformed regulative principle carefully applied. It's a narrowing of authority that excludes covenantal reasoning altogether. Section 3, why this breaks with the Reformed tradition. So at this point, the divergence from the Reformed tradition is more or less structural. The Reformed system understands baptism as a sign and as a seal of covenant membership. It presupposes a visible covenant community, broader than the regenerate alone. Spilsbury cannot accommodate that framework. By denying covenantal administration any role in determining baptismal subjects, several Reformed categories lose their power. The visible and invisible church distinction remains conceptually true, but it no longer functions covenantally to change, or rather to shape church membership. Church membership becomes coextensive with credible professions of faith. The goal is to make the visible church correspond as closely as possible to the visible church, or rather invisible church. Baptism no longer signifies covenant inclusion. It signifies confessed belief. So that's not an accidental difference. It's in-principled. Spilsbury is, quote, Calvinistic in the modern YouTube sense of the term regarding salvation, but he's not Reformed regarding the church. Sharing the doctrines of grace does not entail sharing a covenant theology. Section 4, what Spilsbury does not yet have. It's important not to read later Baptist developments back into Spilsbury. He does not yet possess a fully articulated federal theology. He does not yet offer a refined account of the Abrahamic covenant. He does not yet provide a comprehensive covenantal replacement for what he removes. Spilsbury's work is largely negative and eliminative. He removes infant baptism. He removes covenantal membership apart from profession. He removes national church assumptions inherited from Christendom, but he does not yet rebuild the system. That task will be taken up later by figures such as Nehemiah Cox, who attempt to reconstruct covenantal theology after Spilsbury has cleared the ground. This is why we'd say Spilsbury is foundational without being final. A Reformed assessment of Spilsbury. At this point, a Reformed audience naturally asks the question, okay, but why is he wrong? From a Reformed vantage point, the difficulty with Spilsbury is not his seriousness, obviously, about Scripture. Um, it's the rule of interpretation he adopts for governing the church. His principle sounds cautious and Christ-honoring, but from a Reformed perspective, it proves far too much. If explicit New Testament command is required for every ecclesiastical practice, then doctrines like the Sabbath or even the admission of women to the Lord's Supper become difficult to sustain, since they also rest on covenantal inference rather than direct command. This is precisely why the Westminster Confession affirms doctrine by good and necessary consequence. Unless an Old Testament principle is clearly repealed, it stands, right? Incest is still wrong today. Bestiality, there's a host of rules that would still apply today in every tradition, one would hope. But more deeply, Spilsbury's approach risks what the Reformed have long regarded as a retrogression of grace. Under the Old Covenant, God's promises explicitly embrace believers and their children. And to suggest that the New Covenant, which Scripture calls better, silently revokes that inclusion without clear apostolic prohibition is, to the Reformed mind, theologically inconceivable. Redemptive history moves from lesser to greater, from narrower to expansive, not the other way around. And there's also an unavoidable irony. Spilsbury rejects infant baptism for lack of explicit command, yet he affirms a gathered church model, congregational polity, believer-only membership, none of which are laid out in Scripture with the same explicitness he demands for baptismal subjects. Once covenantal reasoning is excluded, the church is forced to rely on precisely the sort of theological inference Spilsbury claims to prohibit. Final conclusion and forward look. From a Reformed standpoint, Salisbury's move is understandable to a point. It's principled, it's historically significant, but we would say it is unnecessary, and it's restrictive and ultimately unfaithful to the covenantal shape of Scripture itself. He clears the ground for Baptist theology by cutting the covenantal roots the Reformed believe Christ himself intended to preserve. What Spilsbury gives us is the break, but not the replacement. Once covenantal reasoning is set aside, as he does, later Baptists are forced to answer a new question: what takes its place? And that's where the next generation come in. Figures like Thomas Patient and Nehemiah Cox will attempt to rebuild a covenant theology capable of sustaining believers' baptism without collapsing the unity of Scripture. So we'll look at some of their writings next, and we'll look at Spilsbury's own work on baptism in videos to come.